Today in our 2012 GMC Terrain, we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster InvisiBrake Supplemental Braking System, part number RM-8700. Whenever we go to flat tow our Terrain, it's important that we have a supplemental braking system so that we don't wear out the brakes in our motorhome, but also we don't have our Terrain pushing us down the road, making it unsafe. That's where our InvisiBrake is going to help. Our InvisiBrake is going to apply the brakes on our Terrain at the same time that they're being applied at our motorhome, so we're not going to have that major strain of only relying on our motorhome's brakes to slow down. The clamp on the pedal and the pulley on the Firewall is about the only thing that we're going to be able to see. Our InvisiBrake is going to be a one-time installation, set it up, and we're done. We're not going to have to worry about pulling out some box like some of the portable braking systems. We simply get in, hook everything up on our motorhome, and we're ready to go. We are going to have a control box mounted somewhere in our vehicle. We chose to mount ours in the back of the hatch area here. And the yellow knob, we're going to be able to adjust the air pressure, which is going to amount to either more braking pressure or less braking pressure by adjusting the knob back and forth. And we have a gauge to read to make sure that the air pressure is in line with what we want. Along with providing us with normal braking, just driving around town or down the highway, our InvisiBrake is going to come with a breakaway switch. It's really just a safety feature in the event that our vehicle will get broken away from our motorhome and somehow become disconnected. This cable would pull and it would pull out the switch, and it's going to apply the brakes at full pressure. And that'll bring our vehicle to a stop, preventing any kind of further damage. Now, while we're driving down the road in our motorhome, we're going to be able to monitor what's going on with our Terrain behind us. We're going to have a monitor light that we're going to be able to mount inside the dash of our motorhome so we can see when the brakes are being applied in our Terrain. That way, in the case if anything were to fall over inside of our car and the brakes are being applied, before it eats our brakes up, before we have a bunch of flat spots on our tires from dragging it down the road, we're going to know if they're being applied. And whenever we let go of the brakes are going to be released. One thing I like about the InvisiBrake, opposed to a portable braking system, is it uses compressed air to actuate the cylinder and make the pedal depress. Now, there are some portable braking systems that do that as well. However, with the InvisiBrake, it's going to be a one-time installation, and while it may be a lot more in-depth at first to get it installed, we're only going to have to do it one time. We're not going to have to mess with pulling a box in and out, running a wire, finding a power source while our vehicle's off, as well as any kind of interference that may happen with a wireless system when we're trying to monitor. We're going to have a hardwired system that we're going to be able to tell exactly what's going on with our brakes and with our Terrain behind us, and we're not going to have to do anything else extra once it's installed. So now that we've seen our InvisiBrake and gone over some of the features, let's take a closer look on how to install it. Now, keep in mind this is only one component of our flat tow setup. For a base plate, we use the Roadmaster Easy Base Plate Kit with removable arms. For wiring, we use the Roadmaster Universal High Power Dial Wiring Kit. For a tow bar, we use the Roadmaster Sterling All-Terrain Tow Bar. And for a braking system, we use the Roadmaster InvisiBrake Supplemental Braking System. Now, specifically to the Terrain, you're also going to need a stoplight switch. We use the Roadmaster Stoplight Switch Kit. You're also going to need a fuse bypass switch. We use the Roadmaster FuseMaster Fuse Bypass Switch for towed vehicles. Now we're going to give you a brief overview of how our InvisiBrake would be installed. The first thing you want to do is you want to plan your installation out, because it is a rather in-depth install. So the first thing, you want to figure out where you're going to mount your control box. We mounted ours in the back hatch area right behind our spare tire. We carved out some of the foam so it'll sit flat against the floor, and when it comes time, we can bolt it using some self-tapping screws directly to the floor pan. I left everything loose so we can see the connections though. On the back of the controller, we're going to have several different things that are going to be plugged in. We're going to start with the 4-pole wiring that's plugged in at the very end here. Now, this wiring needs to tap into your existing tow bar wiring, which is going to control the light functions on your Terrain. So since we had diodes in ours, and it does run to the back of our taillights, we ran our wire along the back of the hatch area here, and then we found an existing grommet that goes down underneath the vehicle and met up and made our connections under there. Now basically the way we're going to connect our 4-pole wiring coming out of our control box is going to be color for color or function for function. Our yellow wire is going to be our left turn signal, green wire is our right turn signal, our brown wire is our tail light, and our white is our ground. So we're going to find our existing 4-pole wiring and splice those into those existing wires. Now the only difference for our ground is we're going to splice it in, but we also want to have a separate ground coming off of the InvisiBrake itself as well. Now the rest of our plugs and air lines are going to be running towards the front. So we have a connector that's going to have a black cable and a red and black wire coming off of it. And in the back we have this 1/4-inch vacuum hose that we connected an air line to. And then we have a small 1/8-inch air line on the very end. All of this went right towards the driver's seat. So I ran those wires behind the threshold back here, and I went underneath the side panel here towards the passenger door, and I have it running along the edge of the door underneath the panels. We just had to remove this back panel here, the threshold in the bottom, and then the panel that goes in between the back and front seat. We had all of our wires and hoses ran up through the floorboard here, and along the way I taped them together, making it a lot easier to route them and get them where they needed to go. Our airline tube, the black cable, and the red and black wire all need to go outside the car into the engine bay. Now there's not a very good spot to go through the firewall, so what we did is we pulled up the carpet here and we actually drilled a hole through the floor right in front of our emergency brake cable, and we passed all of our wires through there and then put a rubber grommet in place so that the wires wouldn't get chafed. So we had them go down through the floor and we had them go forward and up into the engine bay. One thing is you just want to make sure that all of them are secure and you stay away from any heat sources or any moving parts like the steering, suspension, or the exhaust, because you don't want any kind of damage to happen to either the wires or the airline tube. Now for our small 1/8-inch airline, that's going to run to our air cylinder. Now we chose to mount our air cylinder all the way to the left, right by this bundle of wires here, because our dead pedal, when we put our carpet back and everything in place, it's going to cover it up and it's not going to interfere at all. Our air cylinder is going to actuate our brakes. We're going to have a cable that's coming out of it that's routed down, and we push most of the excess under the carpet in a big loop, and we can see it's coming up right here. Now if I move the insulation out of the way, we have it anchored down, and it's coming up to a pulley that we have mounted on our firewall. And the pulley is attached to this cable that we have mounted around our brake pedal. And when that cylinder actuates, it's going to pull on the cable and cause the brakes to be applied. There are a few things that are very important when you go to mount your pulley, the cable, and the brackets around your brake pedal. You want that bracket to be as low as possible on the brake pedal without interfering with normal driving, because you want to get as much pressure and leverage that you can. Now the excess clamp here, we can cut those off, and we can cut the excess bolts off that are holding it in place if it does interfere. You want to make sure that you mount your pulley directly in line behind that tab where our cable's going through right here. So that way when the pulley starts pulling, the cable's going to go straight and it pulls the pedal straight back, and it's not going to cause any kind of stress on that cable. Also, it's going to make sure that the cable's in line and centered on our pulley so that way it doesn't get chafed. Now we're going to be using 4 self-tapping screws to get the pulley in place, so you want to make sure that it's a solid surface and that it's pretty flat. You don't want to have the pulley on a weird angle or any kind of uneven surface. One thing with the pulley also is once you get everything in and adjusted, you want to make sure that you have just a little bit of slack. So you can see if I grab the cable at the back, you can see the ball moving out just a bit. You want about a 1/4 inch of play so that when you wiggle the cable, the end of the ball just comes out of that bracket right here. And you're going to get that adjustment by adjusting this nut here and the one on the back that's holding our cable in place. You'll get it to a 1/2 inch of adjustment either way, by loosening this nut and adjusting it, threading it in or out. And when the pedal is fully depressed, you want to make sure that the back of the bracket as well as the threaded piece on the cable does not come in contact with that pulley, and that it's going to be as straight as you can get it when it's fully pulled. One other thing that's very important with our pulley is that you need to cut out the insulation and the carpet so that it's going to go around it and it's not laying on top of it, as well as cutting a channel out so that the cable can move freely without getting caught on the insulation. So the red and black wire we have running up right here. Now that just went over towards the driver's side. The black wire went to ground, which we had a ground right by this airline just outside the fuse box that we used. And then the red wire is going to get tapped into a fuse holder and then go to the positive post on the battery. Now we had a jump post right here, so we used this to get our power. Just make sure that you put in that fuse holder that comes in the kit. Now as far as our airline tube goes, that's going to be tapping into the vehicle's vacuum system. That way whenever it goes to push on the brake pedal, it's a lot easier rather than trying to fight that vacuum. So we ran it up here, and then we found our brake booster here. And the way we have this set is we went downstream from where it goes into the brake booster, found the vacuum hose, cut it, and then we put a T in place. One end of the T is going to go from that hose coming from the brake booster, and the other end is going to go back into it, connecting it back to itself. Then we're going to take a little bit more of that 1/4 inch vacuum line and put it in the third section of the T, and that's where that 1/4 inch air line coming from the unit is going to get plugged into. Now a little bit further down the vacuum line going towards the engine, we're going to put a check valve in. Now it's very important that you check the orientation of the check valve. There is an arrow and a red section on it. And you want to make sure that that red section is going towards the engine as well as the arrow is pointing towards the engine. Now we do have that one more cable. That was that black cable, and on the end of it there's going to be little 2 prongs. That's going to go directly to our breakaway switch. So however you routed it, we routed ours continuously under the car. We never went into the engine bay. Just making sure again that you secure it properly, make sure it's not going to rub, get caught on anything, and then we ran it to the front where we have our breakaway switch mounted directly to the base plate. Now our InvisiBrake also has a monitor light that's going to allow us to see when the brakes are being applied in our terrain while we're driving our motorhome. Now they provide you with a couple different cables. One that's going to be running from the inside to the outside of the car. One that's going to be running from the back of the motorhome to the front where we're sitting so we can see the light, as well as one to connect the two in between the car and the motorhome. Now instead of having the wire running and just hanging out here in the front, we chose to hardwire ours to the 6-way that we're using for our electrical connector, as well as the 7-way on the back of our RV. And since we hardwired it, it's going to eliminate the patch cord and be more of a permanent, secure connection that we're not going to have to worry about losing or damaging this wire. Now in any case, if you do choose to run it, or if you choose to hardwire it, we are going to have to add in a stoplight switch. Now the reason for our stoplight switch is because our monitor wire would tap into the cold side of our brake switch. So we have the panels removed here. There's a panel that's underneath, as well as the panel that's right here, just so you can see a little bit easier. But the problem is that on our terrain, the brake switch as well as a lot of the other electronics go dead after a few minutes. So our monitor wire wouldn't be able to get the voltage that it needs. So that's where our stoplight switch is going to come in. And what it's going to do is it's going to use this bracket to mount the switch itself, and there's a plunger that's going to be pressed against the brake arm. So whenever the brakes are depressed, the plunger is going to come out and it's going to provide power to the switch, which then in turn will illuminate our indicator light. Coming off of our switch, we're going to have 2 black wires. And it doesn't matter what we hook up to each one of them, but one of them is going to be for power. And when we get power, we're going to have a few different options of how we're going to get it. You can go directly to the battery, going through the firewall, and you're going to put an inline fuse holder and then connect it directly to the battery, or you can run this red wire over to the passenger side, and we'll use a fuse tap included in the kit, and get our power that way. And that's what we did. We ran our wire over to the passenger side, going through the center console here. So we used a pull wire to get it over here. Now the way our fuse tap is going to work, it's going to have a spot for 2 fuses to go in, and then some blades that we can insert into the spot where the fuse would go. So you're going to want to test each one of your fuses over here to find which one has power even with the key off, so that we know that our stoplight switch will have constant power. Whenever you find a fuse, you're going to put the factory fuse closest to the blades on the fuse tap, and then the provided 10 amp fuse right above it. For reference, we used the second to last fuse on the bottom panel. It's to be right next to a 5 amp fuse just to the right of it. And then whenever we're ready, you just take the blades and insert it like you normally would with the fuse. And tuck our wires back in place and replace the cover. Now the other wire coming off of our stoplight switch is going to be connected into our monitor wire. Now this is the wire that came with our kit, so we just ran it along towards the driver's side, ran it down the panel here, and then we ended up running it down through the same grommet that we had all of our other wires going to. We fed it down, and then we started running it towards the front of the vehicle till we met up with our 6-way socket on the front so we could hardwire it in. So that's how everything goes on in the car. So now what we have left to do is to tuck all of our wires away and put all the panels back. I'm going to take a couple self-tapping screws and washers, and I'm going to come to the very end of the box here on each side. There's a little tab. I'm just going to secure it down to the bottom of the floor that we don't have to worry about it moving around. We can even put the floor covering back. We can see that it's not going to interfere with anything, and it's going to be well hidden in the back. On the back of our motorhome, we took our monitor wire and we tapped into the back of our 7-way, ran it along the frame and up into the passenger compartment. We ran our wire up through this compartment here right by the steering wheel. We connected it to our audible alert, as well as the light that we have mounted on the dash. Now the easiest way to wire these up, the alert and the light, is they're both going to have a red and white wire coming off of them. We're going to tie the 2 red wires together, and using a butt connector, we're going to connect it to the wire that we ran from the back. And then the white wires, we're going to again tie them both together, coming from the audible alert and the light, using a butt connector, and then take another piece of white wire and we're going to connect it to a good chassis ground. Now in order to mount the light, you are going to have to find a nice flat spot on the dash, and Roadmaster does provide you with a sticker that'll go around the light, but we're going to have to drill a 5/16 hole through our dash, and you want to make sure that you run your wires through and then make the connections on the back side, because we're only going to be able to have the back end of our light go through, because it will stop here and have a little catch to where it won't come out. So with everything in place, we can hook up our Terrain and hit the road. That'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster InvisiBrake supplemental braking system, part number RM-8700 on our 2012 GMC Terrain.